Welcome to History for Sleep, where the stories of our world unfold as you drift into dreams. Tonight, let the ancient past guide your imagination, from forgotten kingdoms to mysteries buried beneath the sands of time. Before your eyelids grow heavy, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, so the next time you can fall asleep to another story from the ages. Now, close your eyes, let history become your lullaby. And as you drift away, let's get into the video. The beginning of the gods. In the beginning, before there was light, before there was man, there were gods who walked the earth. Across the barren plains of ancient Mesopotamia, archaeologists uncovered fragments of clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, the first written language known to humankind, cuneiform. These tablets, unearthed from the ruins of Sumer, told stories that challenged everything we thought we knew about human origins. They spoke of beings who came from the heavens, beings the Sumerians called Anunnaki. According to the Sumerian texts, these Anunnaki were not mere mythological deities born from human imagination. They were described as flesh and blood entities, descending from the sky in fiery ships, bringing with them the knowledge of civilization, agriculture, astronomy, law, mathematics, and kingship. They were the architects of early humanity, the teachers of wisdom, and the judges of men. But as the clay tablets reveal, the story of the Anunnaki goes far deeper and far darker than the ancient world ever dared to imagine. The Sumerian dawn. The Sumerian civilization appeared suddenly around 4500 BC in southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Before them, there were only scattered tribes, primitive villages, and nomadic wanderers. Then, almost overnight, came cities like Eridu, Ur, Uruk, and Lagash, complete with temples, advanced irrigation systems, and organized governance. Historians have long been puzzled by this mystery. How could humanity leap from primitive living to organized civilization so rapidly? The Sumerians themselves left us the answer, written in stone. They said they didn't invent civilization. It was given to them by the gods who descended from heaven. In the Sumerian king list, one of the most astonishing ancient records ever found, the scribes wrote, "Kingship was lowered from heaven. In Eridu, Enlil became king. He ruled for 28,800 years." The text continues to list rulers who reigned for thousands of years, long before the flood. To modern eyes, these reigns appear impossible. But to the Sumerians, these weren't metaphors. They were records of divine rulers, the Anunnaki kings who governed the world before the flood destroyed the old order. The meaning of Anunnaki. In cuneiform, the word Anunnaki roughly translates to those who came from heaven to earth. They were said to be the offspring of the sky god Anu and the earth goddess Ki, hence their name, Anunnaki, Anu's people. These beings were depicted as tall, radiant, and powerful. Some wore horned crowns signifying divine authority, others carried mysterious devices or rods, symbols of their command over the earth and the heavens. The Sumerian texts mention Enlil, the ruler of the air and commander of earth, Enki, the wise god of waters and creation, and Ninhursag, the mother goddess who fashioned mankind from clay and the blood of a god. To the Sumerians, these were their creators. But to biblical scholars, these stories sound hauntingly familiar. Because in the book of Genesis, there is another account, one that tells of divine beings who came down from heaven, saw the daughters of men, and took them as wives. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, they bare children to them, mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6 verse 4. Who were these sons of God? Were they angels? Or could they be the same entities the Sumerians called Anunnaki? The biblical paradox. The Bible begins with a statement that echoes through eternity. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1 verse 1. It tells of a divine act, the creation of mankind in God's image, the formation of Adam from dust, and the breath of life given by the Creator himself. But hidden beneath the ancient Hebrew words lie subtle linguistic clues. The Hebrew word translated as God in Genesis 1 verse 1 is Elohim, a plural noun. Though used in a singular context, it literally means the gods. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. For centuries, theologians have debated this plural form. Some say it's the plural of majesty, referring to the singular greatness of God. Others suggest it might hint at a divine council, a group of heavenly beings participating in creation. If the latter is true, then the question arises, could the Sumerian Anunnaki be the same Elohim, the divine beings who stood in the presence of the Most High? The Fall of the Watchers. In the apocryphal Book of Enoch, which expands on Genesis 6, a chilling story unfolds. It describes a group of angels known as the Watchers, divine beings sent to oversee mankind. But when they saw the beauty of human women, they rebelled against heaven's order. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, "Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men and beget us children." 1 Enoch 6:2. 200 of these watchers descended to the earth upon Mount Hermon, led by Simjaza, and taught mankind forbidden knowledge, sorcery, metallurgy, astrology, and war. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants and tyrants who corrupted the earth. The parallels are impossible to ignore. The Sumerian Anunnaki also descended from the sky, intermingled with humanity, and taught advanced knowledge. If the Anunnaki and the Watchers are indeed the same entities, then the Sumerian records might not just be myths, they could be the other side of the same story, told from the perspective of those who once worshipped the fallen ones. Heavenly knowledge, forbidden power. The ancient texts describe Enki, the god of wisdom, as the one who created humanity by mixing clay with divine essence. He taught mankind the secrets of survival, agriculture, irrigation, writing, and healing. Yet in Genesis, the serpent in the Garden of Eden tempts Eve with knowledge forbidden by God, saying, "Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3 verse 5. Could the serpent, often associated with Enki, whose symbol was the serpent, represent the same divine being who gave humans forbidden wisdom? The parallels deepen. In both traditions, the gift of divine knowledge led to a fall, the separation of man from divine innocence. To the Sumerians, Enki was a benefactor, a friend of humanity. To the Hebrews, the bringer of knowledge was the deceiver, Satan, the fallen angel who defied God. Could it be that the story of the fall, told in Genesis, and the descent of the Anunnaki, told in the Sumerian tablets, are two sides of the same celestial rebellion? The Great Flood, judgment on the gods. Both the Bible and the Sumerian epic speak of a global flood, a cataclysm sent by heaven to wipe out a corrupted world. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods send a flood because humanity had become too noisy and impure. Only Utnapishtim, a righteous man, is warned by the god Enki to build a great boat and preserve life. In Genesis, God sends the flood because the earth was filled with violence and wickedness, the result of the Nephilim's corruption. Only Noah, a righteous man, is chosen to build the ark and preserve life. Both accounts describe divine wrath, a chosen survivor, a great vessel, and the renewal of life afterward. But if the Anunnaki were the same fallen beings described in Enoch and Genesis, the flood may not have been just a punishment on mankind, it was a judgment on the gods themselves. The hidden war in heaven. Before the flood, before the creation of man, ancient texts suggest there was a war in heaven. The Bible hints at it in Revelation 12. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. In Sumerian mythology, there is also a tale of rebellion among the gods, a conflict between Enlil, the strict ruler of heaven, and Enki, the defiant god of earth and humanity. Their war divided the Anunnaki themselves, echoing the celestial conflict between the faithful angels and the fallen. Some scholars believe these stories are memories of a single ancient truth, a cosmic rebellion retold through different cultures and languages. The genesis of a mystery. If the Anunnaki and the fallen angels are indeed the same beings, then human history may have begun under the shadow of celestial rebellion. The sudden rise of civilization in Sumer, the forbidden knowledge, the hybrid offspring, the global flood, all these may not be separate myths but chapters of one divine narrative. The Bible calls it the fall of man. The Sumerians called it the age of the gods. Both tell of a time when the divine and the mortal walked side by side until heaven intervened. But one question remains. If the flood wiped them out, why do their names still echo through every ancient culture? Next, Part 2, the descent of the Anunnaki, the gods who walked among men. In the next chapter, we will uncover the moment the Anunnaki arrived, the descriptions of their descent from the heavens, the technology they wielded, and how their presence shaped humanity's destiny. We'll compare these events to biblical descriptions of angelic appearances and divine visitations, exploring how the line between God and angel began to blur. The descent of the Anunnaki, the gods who walked among men. And there were giants in the earth in those days, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. Genesis 6 verse 4. When the ancients looked to the skies, they did not see an empty void of stars. They saw the realm of the gods. And according to the oldest records ever found, the Sumerian tablets, there was a time when those gods came down to dwell among humanity. The Sumerians called it the descent of the Anunnaki. And what they described sounds eerily like something torn from both the Book of Genesis and the Book of Enoch, a celestial invasion that forever changed the destiny of mankind. The descent to earth. In the beginning, the Sumerian sky god Anu ruled the heavens, while his sons Enlil and Enki ruled the realms below. But according to the ancient text known as the Atrahasis epic, the gods grew weary. The lesser deities, called the Igigi, were forced to labor on earth, digging canals, shaping rivers, cultivating fields for the higher gods. After thousands of years, the Igigi rebelled, refusing to continue their toil. They surrounded the palace of Enlil, crying out against their burdens. Rather than destroy them, the Anunnaki Council gathered to find another solution. Enki, the god of wisdom, proposed a plan that would change everything. Let us make a being in our image, after our likeness, that he may bear the yoke of the gods. The words echo through time, almost identical to the Book of Genesis. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Genesis 1 verse 26. Was this merely coincidence, or evidence that both accounts recall the same event from different perspectives? The Sumerians claimed the Anunnaki descended to earth, not as spirits, but as physical beings from the heavens. They landed in a region they called Eridu, the home in the far away. Today, Eridu is recognized as the oldest city in Mesopotamia, the birthplace of civilization. From this sacred place, the gods established Eden, the abode of Enki. The name sounds remarkably similar to the Hebrew Eden. Both were lush gardens filled with rivers, life, and divine presence. Both were places where gods and humans once walked together. The creation of humanity. The Sumerian tablets describe how Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag, also called Ninmah, created the first human beings. They mixed clay from the earth with the blood and essence of a god who had been sacrificed. From this divine mixture came Adamu, the first man. The name Adamu appears thousands of years before the Hebrew Adam. And just as the Bible says that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, the Sumerians claimed that Enki's divine breath animated the clay body. To them, humanity was a hybrid, part earth, part divine, created to serve the gods but gifted with their likeness. Yet Enki's creation was not just an act of servitude, it was also rebellion. Enlil, the stern ruler of earth, opposed the idea of giving humanity divine knowledge. But Enki disobeyed. He taught mankind agriculture, writing, medicine, and the secrets of the stars. In Genesis, we find the same story retold, but reversed in moral tone. The serpent, symbol of Enki, tempts man with forbidden knowledge, leading to humanity's fall. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods. Genesis 3 verse 5. To the Sumerians, this was enlightenment. To the Hebrews, it was sin. Two ancient cultures, one calling the giver of knowledge a god of wisdom, the other calling him the deceiver. Yet both describe the same event, a divine being giving mankind knowledge that heaven had forbidden. The cities of the gods. After humanity was created, the Anunnaki divided the earth among themselves. The tablets record that kingship was lowered from heaven, and divine rule began in Eridu, then moved to Badtibira, Larak, Sitpar, and Shurupak, the cities that existed before the flood. Each of these cities was said to be ruled directly by an Anunnaki god or demigod, beings who walked among humans as rulers, teachers, and judges. In the Bible, we read of similar cities, Eden, Enoch, Nod, Babel, and later Ur, centers of early civilization, often associated with rebellion against God. Could these early kingdoms of Sumer have been the same as the pre-flood world described in Genesis 6, when the earth was filled with violence through them? The Sumerian records portray a world where gods and humans interacted openly, even intermarrying. The offspring of these unions, the demigods or Nephilim, became kings and warriors. Their strength and size were legendary, and their reigns lasted for centuries. Archaeological discoveries show that some early Sumerian rulers claimed descent from the gods. Inscriptions speak of kings like Gilgamesh, described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. This exact mixture, part divine, part mortal, mirrors the hybrid offspring mentioned in Genesis and Enoch. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, mighty men of old, men of renown. Genesis 6 verse 4. Heavenly fire and celestial craft. The ancient Sumerians were detailed observers of the heavens. Their knowledge of the stars, planetary motion, and cosmic cycles was far beyond what a primitive society should have known. Where did this knowledge come from? In several Sumerian hymns, the gods are described descending in fiery chariots or whirling wheels of light that roared like storms. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of celestial gateways that connected the realm of the gods to the earth. Temple carvings depict the gods surrounded by what appear to be winged discs, radiant objects that flew through the skies. To ancient eyes, these were divine vehicles, the chariots of the gods. To modern minds, they sound strikingly like descriptions of advanced flying craft. In the book of Ezekiel, the prophet describes a vision of wheels within wheels descending from the heavens, glowing like molten metal and filled with fire and lightning. Inside were beings who looked like men, but not of this world. And I looked, and, behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire. Ezekiel 1 verses 4-5. Was Ezekiel witnessing the same type of descent the Sumerians recorded, a visitation of the heavenly host? Could these be the Watchers, the Anunnaki, manifesting once again to mortal eyes? The covenant of the gods. Once mankind was established, the Sumerian texts describe a remarkable decree. The Anunnaki gathered to divide dominion over the earth. Enlil was given authority over the skies and command over the divine council. Enki took rule over the deep waters and wisdom. Inanna, the goddess of war and love, was granted power over kingship and fertility. Each Anunnaki lord governed human cities through priest-kings, who served as intermediaries between heaven and earth. In temples known as ziggurats, the faithful offered sacrifices of grain, wine, and incense, not to idols, but to the physical presence of their gods. The Bible also speaks of sacrifices, altars, and heavenly covenants. But in Genesis, only one God makes a covenant with man, not many. The covenant of the Anunnaki fractured mankind into servitude to multiple deities. The covenant of Yahweh called for devotion to the one true God. It was as if heaven itself had been divided, one faction giving man false gods, the other calling him back to divine truth. The forbidden unions. The book of Enoch expands on Genesis' mysterious verse about the sons of God and daughters of men. It describes how the Watchers took wives, taught enchantments, and birthed a race of giants. These giants devoured the earth's resources and turned to violence. Their corruption spread across creation. The Sumerians, too, recorded stories of divine human unions producing hybrid rulers. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes him as a demigod of enormous stature, seeking eternal life denied by the gods. The bloodlines of the ancient kings, the so-called royal line of Anu, claimed descent from these unions. Even after the flood, these bloodlines persisted, shaping the royal dynasties of Egypt, Babylon, and beyond. Could this be what Genesis meant when it said, there were giants on the earth after that? If so, humanity's early history was not merely human. It was entangled with the divine, or perhaps, the fallen divine. A growing rebellion. As mankind multiplied and the offspring of heaven and earth ruled in pride, the world descended into chaos. The Sumerian texts tell of divine anger between Enlil and Enki, and of Enlil's decision to destroy humanity with a flood. In the Atrahasis epic, Enlil declares, "The noise of mankind has become too much, I cannot sleep because of their clamor." But Enki, who loved his creation, warned a mortal man, Atrahasis, to build a great boat and preserve the seed of life. In Genesis, Yahweh tells Noah the same. Both men build a vessel. Both survive the deluge. Both offer sacrifices afterward. These are not coincidences. They are fragments of a single story, one remembered through two lenses, the Mesopotamian view of rebellious gods, and the Hebrew revelation of a righteous creator judging his own heavenly host. The divine conflict. The descent of the Anunnaki was not unity, it was division. While some gods sought to uplift humanity, others enslaved it. While Enki taught wisdom, Enlil demanded obedience. While Inanna offered fertility, she also unleashed wars of unimaginable destruction. In the heavens, rebellion had begun. On earth, its reflection unfolded. This mirrors the biblical account of Lucifer's rebellion, when a third of heaven's angels were cast down. In Revelation 12, the dragon's tail draws a third of the stars of heaven, a poetic reference to fallen celestial beings. In Mesopotamian lore, too, the fallen ones are depicted as deposed gods, sent into the underworld for defying the divine order. Could it be that the Sumerians were witnessing and recording the aftermath of the same cosmic revolt the Bible describes? The question of origins. Archaeologists still debate how the Sumerians appeared so suddenly and so advanced. Their origin remains one of history's great mysteries. Their knowledge of the solar system, including planets invisible to the naked eye, has baffled modern science. Their mathematical system was precise, their legal codes complex, and their mythology eerily consistent with later biblical events. The Sumerians themselves offered no mystery. They said plainly, "Everything we know, we were taught by the gods." And if these gods were not myth but memory, not divine, but fallen, then the opening chapters of Genesis may not only recount man's creation, but the descent of heaven's exiles who walked among men. The descent of the Anunnaki was the dawn of civilization, and perhaps, the beginning of human rebellion. The stories of Genesis, Enoch, and Sumer may not contradict each other, but rather, complete one another. The Anunnaki came down in glory and light, bringing knowledge, power, and dominion. But what began as enlightenment soon became corruption. Heaven wept, earth trembled, and judgment drew near. In the next part, we will explore the forbidden knowledge, the secrets the Anunnaki, and the fallen watchers, gave to mankind, metallurgy, astrology, magic, and war, and how this knowledge led to the destruction of the world before the flood. The forbidden knowledge, secrets from the gods that doomed the world. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The Book of Enoch 7:1-2. The clay tablets of Sumer whisper of gods who descended from the stars and bestowed knowledge upon man. The ancient Hebrews, however, tell a darker tale of angels who defied the Most High and corrupted humanity with secrets never meant to be known. Two traditions, two languages, one story. The Anunnaki and the Watchers brought light to the world, but that light burned too bright. The gifts of the gods. After their descent, the Anunnaki ruled over the first human cities and began to share their wisdom. They taught mankind agriculture, astronomy, medicine, and metallurgy, arts that transformed scattered tribes into mighty civilizations. In the Sumerian instruction of Shuruppak, one of the world's oldest texts, we find advice that mirrors later biblical proverbs, moral codes, laws, and understanding of justice, all said to come from the gods. The Sumerians credited Enki, the god of wisdom, with teaching irrigation and engineering. Ninjishida, the lord of the tree of truth, taught herbal medicine. Nabu, the god of writing, gave mankind the gift of language and record-keeping. But in the Hebrew and Enochian accounts, these same gifts take on a sinister tone. And Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth. 1 Enoch 8:1. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, and Amaros the resolving of enchantments. 1 Enoch 8:3. Knowledge was power, but power corrupts. The more man learned, the more he strayed from his creator. What the Sumerians saw as enlightenment, the prophets saw as apostasy, a rebellion that began with forbidden knowledge. The birth of metallurgy and war. One of the most profound gifts the Anunnaki allegedly gave mankind was the secret of metalwork. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watcher named Azazel revealed the techniques of forging weapons, shaping armor, and crafting ornaments of gold and silver. Before this revelation, humanity fought with stone and wood. After it, they wielded bronze and iron. The balance of power shifted, tribes became armies, cities became empires, and kings became gods. In the Sumerian lamentation for Uruk, the gods themselves weep over the wars that followed. It says, "The storm that annihilates the land roared, the storm that destroys cities swept the people away." The Sumerians recorded not just technological advancement but its terrible cost. Every gift of heaven came with blood. In Genesis, the same transformation occurs after the fall. Cain's descendants, particularly Tubal-Cain, are described as instructors of every artificer in brass and iron. Genesis 4 verse 22. The line of Cain, symbolic of rebellion, becomes the cradle of technology, the same way Sumer credits the gods of defiance for human progress. Humanity's thirst for knowledge had begun. But it was not wisdom that grew, it was pride. Astrology, reading the heavens. The Sumerians were the first to chart the stars, to name constellations, and to divide the heavens into 12 houses, the zodiac. To them, the stars were not distant suns, but the thrones of the gods. The Anunnaki were said to rule not only the earth but also the heavenly realms, each god associated with a celestial body. Enlil with Jupiter. Enki with Neptune. Inanna with Venus. Utu, Shamash, with the sun. Nana Isin, with the moon. Through these correspondences, they developed astrology, the belief that human destiny could be read in the movements of the heavens. The Book of Enoch records that one group of watchers taught mankind the signs of the clouds and the course of the moon. These celestial teachings were not innocent, they altered man's relationship with God. Instead of seeking the Creator, mankind began to worship the creation, the stars and planets. This is why, in the Ten Commandments, God later declares, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image of anything that is in heaven above." Exodus 20 verse 4. Astrology was the religion of the Anunnaki, a system that turned the heavens into idols. What began as divine revelation became cosmic rebellion. The art of sorcery and enchantment. In both Sumerian and Hebrew traditions, the beings who descended from the heavens were deeply associated with magic, the manipulation of unseen forces. The Sumerians called it Me, the divine decrees or cosmic powers governing creation. These Me were stored in the temple of Enki, and whoever possessed them could shape reality itself, law, wisdom, kingship, fertility, and even death. According to myth, the goddess Inanna stole these powers from Enki and brought them to Uruk, thus empowering mankind to rule without divine consent. This theft mirrors the biblical temptation in Eden, the taking of forbidden power. In Enoch's account, the Watchers taught humanity charms, enchantments, and root cutting, the earliest forms of witchcraft and alchemy. They introduced the use of mirrors, cosmetics, and dyes, tools not only of vanity but of seduction. And the women became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. 1 Enoch 7:2. This union of forbidden magic and hybrid offspring plunged the earth into corruption. To the prophets, it was a betrayal. To the ancient Sumerians, it was progress. But heaven saw it as a violation of sacred order. The rise of the giants. The Nephilim, the giants born of divine and human unions, became the rulers of the ancient world. In Mesopotamian art, colossal figures guard the gates of temples, part man, part beast, part god. They symbolize power, protection, and terror. These hybrid beings were said to possess incredible strength, wisdom, and longevity. They were kings and heroes, remembered in Sumerian lists and epic tales. But their reign was not peaceful. Both the Book of Enoch and Sumerian laments describe a world consumed by violence and bloodshed. The Nephilim devoured all that the earth produced. When resources ran out, they turned upon mankind, and finally, upon each other. They began to sin against birds, and beasts, and reptiles, and fish, and to devour one another's flesh. 1 Enoch 7:5. This unholy bloodshed provoked divine wrath. Heaven would not remain silent forever. Heaven's watchers condemned. The Book of Enoch describes a dramatic moment when the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel appeal to the Most High, reporting the crimes of the Watchers. And they said to the Lord of Ages, Behold what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets. 1 Enoch 9:6-7. The decree was given, the Watchers would be bound beneath the earth until the day of judgment. Their hybrid offspring would be destroyed in the coming flood. In Mesopotamian myth, similar stories persist. Certain Anunnaki are cast into the abyss, the Abzu or Kur, for defying divine order. Some are exiled to the underworld to rule over the dead. The Bible later echoes this cosmic imprisonment. God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness. 2 Peter 2 verse 4. To the Sumerians, it was a divine restructuring of heaven. To the Hebrews, it was judgment. But the meaning is the same, a rebellion crushed, a world about to be washed clean. The corruption of civilization. As centuries passed, the forbidden knowledge spread. Temples rose, kings declared themselves gods, and blood sacrifices were offered to the sky lords who once walked the earth. In Sumer, Egypt, and Canaan alike, idols of stone and gold replaced the invisible creator. Mankind no longer sought the one who made heaven and earth, but those who had descended from it. The Epic of Gilgamesh shows a proud king seeking immortality from the gods, a direct echo of Eden's temptation. He fails, just as Adam did. The message is clear across both traditions: divine power cannot be seized without consequence. The Watchers' legacy lived on in the occult practices of Babylon, in astrology, alchemy, and ritual magic, systems that promise secret wisdom but led to spiritual bondage. Even today, echoes of these mysteries persist in symbols, secret societies, and esoteric philosophies tracing back to the plains of Sumer. What began as revelation became religion. What began as knowledge became idolatry. And heaven prepared to intervene once more. The flood approaches. The Sumerian gods, alarmed by the chaos unleashed upon the earth, convened in council. Enlil, furious at the corruption, demanded that mankind be destroyed. In the Atrahasis epic, he declares, "The gods have decided to exterminate mankind. The decision cannot be changed." But Enki, ever the protector of humanity, defied the council. In secret, he warned Atrahasis, the exceedingly wise, to build a great ship, sealing himself inside with animals of every kind. In the Hebrew account, God warns Noah, calling him righteous in his generation, a man perfect in his generations, a phrase some interpret to mean untainted by the corruption of the fallen ones. In both stories, the world faces a cleansing flood, not only to erase human wickedness, but to purge the taint of the fallen gods from the earth. The very knowledge that once elevated mankind now condemns it. The weapons forged by divine hands will perish in divine waters. The cost of forbidden wisdom. The story of the Anunnaki's knowledge is not merely about technology or magic. It is about the spiritual cost of enlightenment without obedience. Humanity was made in the image of God, but the Anunnaki sought to remake man in their own image. What began as imitation became mutation. What began as curiosity became corruption. The serpent's promise, "Ye shall be as gods," was fulfilled, but only in tragedy. Every ancient culture carries this echo: Atlantis destroyed for its arrogance, Babel scattered for its ambition, Sumer drowned beneath its rivers. Civilization after civilization rose upon the same promise, and fell under the same curse. The divine experiment begins. The story of Eden, as told in the book of Genesis, is one of innocence, temptation, and the beginning of human knowledge. But beneath its poetic surface may lie a coded account of an ancient event, one that aligns with the Sumerian descriptions of divine genetic intervention. In Sumerian tablets, we read of the E.Din, meaning home of the righteous ones, a lush enclosure located near the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the same geographic setting described in Genesis. Could it be that Eden and E.Din are one and the same? If so, then the creation of man described in Genesis 2 verse 7, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life," might not refer to spontaneous creation from soil, but rather to a scientific process of genetic engineering. The Sumerian Enki, known later as Ea, is described as the god who formed mankind by mixing the essence of the gods with the clay of earth. He and the goddess Ninhursag, also called Mummy, performed this act to solve a pressing problem, the labor burden of the Anunnaki. In the Sumerian creation epic Atrahasis, the gods complain of toiling in the mines and fields, saying, "The work was heavy, the toil was hard, the distress was great." Enki proposes a bold solution: let one god be slaughtered, and let the gods and men be mixed with his flesh and blood. The clay used to form mankind was, symbolically, a vessel infused with divine DNA. If we place this beside Genesis, the parallels are impossible to ignore. The breath of life may represent the infusion of something more than oxygen, possibly knowledge, genetics, or divine spark. The forbidden fruit, offered later, would symbolize the final step, awakening human consciousness. 2. Enki and the Serpent of Wisdom. Within the Eden narrative, the serpent is portrayed as the deceiver, the one who tempts Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge. Yet in many ancient traditions, the serpent is not a symbol of evil, but of wisdom, transformation, and enlightenment. The Sumerian god Enki was associated with serpentine symbols and was known as the god of knowledge and life. His emblem was two entwined serpents, eerily similar to the modern caduceus used in medicine to represent healing and DNA. If Enki is represented by the serpent, then his role in Eden might not have been one of rebellion against God, but rather defiance of another authority, Enlil, the stern commander of the Anunnaki who forbade sharing divine knowledge with humankind. Genesis 3 verse 22 reads, "And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil." This implies there was more than one being involved in this conversation, one of us. Who were the us? Biblical scholars often say this is the plural majesty of God, but ancient Near Eastern parallels point toward the council of gods, the Anunnaki. The serpent's act, therefore, may have been the moment humanity became self-aware, capable of thought and moral judgment, an act forbidden by Enlil, but orchestrated by Enki, who believed humans deserved freedom. Thus, in the Genesis account, the serpent's punishment, being cast down, might echo Enki's rebellion against Enlil's authority, and his punishment in later myths. But to humanity, he was both a savior and a transgressor, the giver of knowledge who defied the divine hierarchy. 3. The trees of knowledge and life. The Bible describes two trees in Eden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Humanity was forbidden to eat from the first, for it would open their eyes to understanding, and from the second, because it would make them immortal. The parallels in Sumerian and Akkadian texts are fascinating. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero seeks a plant that grants eternal life, described as growing beneath the deep waters, guarded by a serpent. The symbolism repeats: the quest for immortality, the serpent's presence, and divine limitation on human longevity. Could the tree of life represent access to Anunnaki genetic technology, a way to extend life as the gods did? The Anunnaki were described as near immortal, living tens of thousands of years by human measure. If early humans were their hybrid offspring, it makes sense that this longevity was partially restricted. The geneticists, Enki and Ninhursag, may have engineered humanity with certain limitations, perhaps even a lifespan code embedded in DNA. When Genesis says, "Lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever," Genesis 3 verse 22, it implies there existed a real, tangible mechanism that could extend life, something physical, not merely symbolic. The cherubim with flaming swords guarding the way might represent a barrier of divine authority, or even a physical boundary to the god's domain, perhaps technology humanity was forbidden to approach again. 4. The expulsion, the fall or liberation. When Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, the Bible frames it as a punishment, the loss of paradise. But from another view, it was humanity's initiation into independence. In the Sumerian myth, when Enki's experiment succeeded, and humans began to think for themselves, Enlil grew furious. He declared the humans noisy, troublesome, and ungrateful. Genesis 3 verse 23 says, "Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken." In Sumerian versions, this reflects Enlil banishing humankind from the Garden of the Gods, forcing them to survive on their own, cut off from divine aid. Yet the knowledge given to them by Enki ensured their survival. They could farm, build, and reproduce, exactly as the Anunnaki intended, though perhaps not in the way Enlil approved. This divergence, Enki the benefactor, Enlil the enforcer, would later manifest in religious archetypes, the loving, merciful deity versus the wrathful judge. And in later Judeo-Christian tradition, the serpent, Enki's symbol, was vilified as Satan, the adversary. But could this be an inversion of history? Could the being who enlightened humanity have been rebranded as evil, to hide a greater truth, that mankind's fall was actually the first act of spiritual awakening? 5. Genetic clues and the missing link. Modern science has uncovered intriguing anomalies in human DNA that continue to puzzle researchers. Around 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged suddenly, distinct from earlier hominids, possessing advanced intelligence, language, and social complexity. There is a missing link in the evolutionary chain, a gap that genetic mutation alone cannot explain. Some geneticists, including Zecharia Sitchin and Lloyd Pye, proposed that this leap may have been guided, that our DNA bears signs of deliberate modification. Studies have noted the sudden appearance of the FOXP2 gene, crucial for speech, and the human chromosome 2 fusion event, an inexplicable joining of two ancestral ape chromosomes into one. Could this be the mark of our creation, the divine fingerprint of genetic engineering? When Genesis says man was created in our image, after our likeness, Genesis 1 verse 26, it suggests not a metaphorical resemblance, but a literal genetic one. The Anunnaki may have transferred aspects of their own biology into early humans, resulting in beings capable of worship, creativity, and consciousness, yet limited, mortal, and dependent. This would explain why ancient kings, especially in Mesopotamia, often claimed divine descent. Their bloodlines were said to come from the gods. The royal blue blood of antiquity may trace back to those first hybrid humans, the Adamu, the prototypes born in Eden. 6. The divine conflict over humanity. After the expulsion from Eden, both Genesis and Sumerian tablets describe ongoing tension among the gods. Humanity's potential became the center of cosmic controversy. Enlil, the authoritarian leader, saw mankind as an error, a being that disrupted divine order. Enki, on the other hand, viewed humans as his children, worthy of compassion and freedom. This conflict would echo throughout the ancient world. In the Bible, God's angels rebelled and fell to earth, mating with the daughters of men, Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4. In the Sumerian texts, certain Anunnaki defied Enlil's decrees and took human women, giving rise to the Nephilim, giants and heroes of old. The same event, seen from two perspectives, describes divine beings crossing boundaries, spreading knowledge, and challenging authority. If Enlil corresponds to the biblical Yahweh Elohim, the jealous God who demands obedience, and Enki corresponds to the serpent or Lucifer, the light-bearer who grants forbidden wisdom, then Genesis becomes not a tale of sin, but of rebellion for freedom. Humanity's awakening was not accidental, it was destiny, orchestrated by a God who believed that creation deserved choice. 7. The spiritual consequence, knowledge and separation. The knowledge gained in Eden brought both blessing and burden. For the first time, humans understood morality, mortality, and the weight of decision. They became aware of themselves and their place in the universe, separate from the gods, yet bound to them. In biblical theology, this separation became known as the fall of man. But from a deeper view, it may have been the beginning of the soul's journey, the divine plan that allowed free will. If the Anunnaki were indeed the Elohim, plural gods, then the fall was the moment humanity stepped out of their control. Enki's act granted humankind the ability to evolve spiritually. Enlil's reaction ensured they would do so through struggle. Both forces, light and order, rebellion and obedience, became the twin poles of human existence. And thus, the Eden event was not just about knowledge, it was about purpose. 8. The legacy of Eden. The story of Eden echoes across cultures, the Greek myth of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, the Babylonian legend of Adapa gaining wisdom but denied immortality, the Egyptian tales of Thoth granting divine knowledge. In all these myths, a divine being gives humans wisdom against the will of higher powers, and humanity pays the price. This universal theme suggests a shared ancient memory, an event that changed the course of human evolution. Eden, then, may represent a real location, a real experiment, and a real turning point in our history when the gods' creation became self-aware and divine knowledge was passed down to mankind. That knowledge, hidden in ancient texts, encoded in DNA, and remembered in myth, continues to call to us even today, urging humanity to rediscover who we truly are, not mere dust, but divine hybrids, carrying within us the spark of the gods. When the Sumerians inscribed their earliest tablets detailing the divine acts of the Anunnaki, they left behind something astonishing, a story of the creation of humankind. But this story, while cloaked in myth and cuneiform poetry, bears eerie similarities to the biblical account of Adam and Eve. Could these two narratives, one from ancient Mesopotamia and the other from the Hebrew scriptures, be describing the same event from different lenses? The book of Genesis tells us that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, Genesis 2 verse 7. The Sumerian tablets, however, claim that the god Enki, assisted by the goddess Ninhursag, also called Ninmah, created humanity by combining the essence or blood of the gods with the clay of the earth. This act was not merely symbolic, it was described as a genetic fusion. Humanity, according to the Sumerians, was born out of divine intervention. The labor of the gods. Before man was made, the Anunnaki themselves were weary. The Atrahasis epic describes how lower-ranking gods were forced to toil in the gold mines and irrigation works for their higher-ranking masters. For thousands of years, the Igigi, the servant gods, dug, tilled, and maintained the earth, until they rebelled. In this story, the Igigi laid down their tools, burned their equipment, and surrounded the palace of Enlil, the supreme commander. Their complaint was simple: the work is too hard. We are tired. Faced with potential chaos in the heavens, Enki, the god of wisdom, proposed a radical solution. He told the assembly, "Let us create a Lulu, a primitive worker. He shall bear the yoke. The work of the gods he shall do." The gods agreed. It was then that Enki and Ninhursag began the first genetic experiment in recorded history. The clay and the blood. According to the Sumerian account, Enki took clay from the banks of the Abzu, the underground waters, possibly representing mineral-rich soil or life-giving waters, and mixed it with the blood of a god. The text says, "Let a god and a man be mixed together. Let a god's flesh and blood be mixed with the clay." This divine blood was said to carry the essence of the gods, their spiritual and biological signature. When infused with clay, it created a being capable of both spiritual awareness and physical labor, the human. If this is metaphor, it's profound. But if taken literally, it suggests genetic manipulation, something modern science has only recently begun to explore. Ancient astronaut theorists propose that this act describes a process akin to DNA hybridization. The blood of the gods could represent genetic material, the blueprint of the Anunnaki. The result? The first man. The Adamu. The Adamu and Adam. Here lies the most fascinating parallel. The word Adamu in Sumerian means man or earthling. In Hebrew, Adam also means man or from the ground, derived from Adamah, meaning earth. The Adamu was said to be created in a model house or Bit-Shimti, where the creation chamber was guarded by Ninhursag. In this sacred space, the Anunnaki labored for 7 cycles to bring forth a being that could live, breathe, and serve. The Sumerian text recounts that after several failed attempts, where the creatures could not speak, reproduce, or stand upright, Enki finally succeeded in creating the perfect hybrid. The god declared, "My hands have made it." In Genesis, we find a mirror reflection. God forms man from the dust and declares creation complete. The similarity is almost too precise to ignore. But the Bible adds a unique touch, the breath of life. Genesis 2 verse 7 says that God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The Hebrew word rosh means both breath and spirit. Could this divine breath correspond to the infusion of consciousness or soul, something the Sumerians might have symbolized through the transfer of divine essence? Divine DNA and the image of God. Genesis 1 verse 26 states, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." The plural form thus has puzzled scholars for centuries. Traditional interpretations suggest it refers to the Trinity or a divine council. But in light of the Sumerian narratives, it raises another possibility: a group of divine beings collaborating in human creation. If the Anunnaki were indeed involved, then humanity was made in their image quite literally. We would bear their physical resemblance and mental capacities. Yet, the infusion of divine spirit, the Ruach Elohim, distinguishes humanity from mere biological machines. In both stories, man is not created as a slave in the modern sense, but as a caretaker of divine property. Genesis 2 verse 15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." Similarly, the Adamu was made to tend the Eden, the cultivated land of the gods, watered by 4 rivers. The parallels between Eden and Eden are unmistakable. Both are described as lush, enclosed gardens near the confluence of major rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Both are places where divine beings walk among men. The female counterpart, Tiamat and Eve. Once the Adamu was created, he was alone. The Anunnaki observed that the creature, though capable of labor, was incomplete. The texts describe how Ninhursag then fashioned a female counterpart from the same substance. In Genesis, Adam's loneliness prompts God to create Eve from his rib. The Hebrew word tsela, translated as rib, can also mean side, suggesting that Eve was made from Adam's side or essence, not necessarily a literal bone. The Sumerian parallel speaks of Ninhursag performing surgery with the help of Enki, creating a woman who could bear offspring. What's even more intriguing is the linguistic connection. In one Sumerian tale, Enki becomes ill after eating forbidden plants. Ninhursag heals him by creating 8 new beings, one for each part of his body. The goddess assigned to heal Enki's rib was named Ninti, which means lady of the rib or lady who gives life. In Hebrew, Eve is Chava, meaning life. The parallel is again uncanny. Both the Sumerian Ninti and the biblical Eve are associated with life and the rib. The Garden of the Gods. The Eden, often written E.din, literally means abode of righteousness or plain of delight. It was said to be located near the Persian Gulf, between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, in a region corresponding to modern-day southern Iraq. Here the gods had their gardens, where fruit trees bore abundant harvests, and where gold and lapis lazuli were plentiful. The E.din was also home to a tree of life, from which the gods consumed sustenance to maintain their longevity. In Genesis, Eden too is described as having the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The forbidden fruit episode could be a symbolic reference to the moment humanity became self-aware, or, as some interpret, when humans accessed forbidden knowledge once reserved for the gods. The serpent and Enki. No discussion of Eden is complete without mentioning the serpent. In Genesis 3, the serpent tempts Eve to eat from the forbidden tree, telling her that by doing so, she would become like God, knowing good and evil. In Sumerian mythology, the serpent is a recurring symbol of Enki, the god of wisdom and creation, often depicted with serpentine motifs. Enki was known as the one who gifted knowledge and civilization to humanity, sometimes in defiance of Enlil's strict commands. If we interpret the Genesis serpent as a symbolic reference to Enki, the narrative takes on a new dimension. The serpent's act of giving knowledge mirrors Enki's role in empowering humanity with intelligence and awareness. Could the biblical serpent be the reimagined version of Enki, the benefactor God recast as a deceiver? If so, Genesis 3 might reflect a theological reinterpretation, transforming the once revered Sumerian god of wisdom into a symbol of rebellion against divine authority. The curse and the expulsion. After Adam and Eve gain knowledge, they are cast out of Eden. Similarly, in the Sumerian myths, humanity's growing independence troubles the gods. Humans begin to multiply, make noise, and challenge divine control. Enlil, in particular, becomes enraged by human behavior, setting the stage for later events like the Great Flood. Genesis 3 verse 23 says, "Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken." Humanity's exile is both punishment and destiny, to labor, suffer, and strive outside paradise. The parallels are chilling. In both stories, divine beings create humans, grant them knowledge, then punish them for overstepping boundaries. The gods, whether Anunnaki or Elohim, establish a pattern of control, testing, and consequence. Spiritual significance. If the Anunnaki were the fallen angels or divine beings referenced in Genesis, their creation of humanity would not be mere myth but a pivotal act of rebellion. They would have defied the higher authority, perhaps the true creator, by giving humanity knowledge, autonomy, and the spark of divine consciousness. In this light, Genesis may not contradict Sumerian tradition but rather reframes it. Where the Sumerians celebrated Enki as the wise benefactor, the Hebrews, guided by monotheistic revelation, portrayed such defiance as rebellion. The gods of Sumer become the watchers who left their first estate, Jude 1 verse 6. Part 5 bridges two of the oldest creation stories on Earth, the Sumerian and the biblical. Both speak of divine beings shaping man from the dust, both mention a garden, both speak of forbidden knowledge, and both end in exile. If the Anunnaki were indeed the gods who walked in Eden, then the creation of Adam and Eve may represent not the beginning of humanity, but the beginning of conscious humanity, beings capable of knowing both good and evil, of choosing between obedience and rebellion, between God and the gods. In the next part, we'll explore what happened after Eden, the strange unions between the sons of God and the daughters of men, the birth of the Nephilim, and the great flood that sought to erase the hybrid bloodlines from the earth. After the expulsion from Eden, humanity entered a new phase of existence, one where knowledge and consciousness had been awakened, but where divine boundaries had been crossed. Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4 recounts a mysterious and controversial event. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. This passage has puzzled theologians for millennia. Who were the sons of God? Who were these giants, the Nephilim? And how do these stories connect with the Sumerian Anunnaki? The fallen angels and the Anunnaki. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text, provides much-needed clarity. It expands upon the Genesis account, identifying the sons of God as angels who descended from heaven to interact with humanity. Enoch names leaders such as Semjaza and Azazel, who taught humans forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, sorcery, astrology, and more. When compared to the Sumerian records, these watchers strongly resemble the Anunnaki. Both were described as divine beings who came from the heavens, shared knowledge with humans, and crossed boundaries established by higher authorities. The Anunnaki, particularly Enki, were credited with genetic experiments to create the Adamu and his descendants. The Sumerian texts mention later unions between gods and humans, producing hybrid beings. Genesis and Enoch describe a similar scenario, the Nephilim, giants born of human watcher unions. The parallels suggest that the biblical narrative may have preserved a distorted memory of the Anunnaki's interactions with humanity. Where the Sumerians celebrated these hybrids as heroes or demigods, the Hebrew tradition cast them as corrupted offspring, whose very existence contributed to the flood of violence on earth. The hybrid children, giants and warriors. The Nephilim were described as physically enormous, often interpreted as giants, though the Hebrew word Nephilim can also be translated as fallen ones. Their appearance terrified early humans, and their deeds were legendary. They possessed extraordinary strength, intelligence, and cunning. In Sumerian epics, similar beings appear. Figures such as Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, were said to be 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. These hybrid figures, like the Nephilim, became rulers, builders, and warriors, reshaping civilization. The Anunnaki likely engineered these hybrids to consolidate power. A purely human workforce could perform tasks, but a hybrid being would inherit some divine authority and the capacity for leadership. These semi-divine beings would serve as intermediaries between humans and gods, enforcing the will of the Anunnaki. Teachers of the forbidden arts. The sons of God, or Anunnaki, did not simply mate with humans. They actively instructed them. Enoch describes Azazel teaching men to make weapons of war, swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Semjaza revealed the secrets of sorcery, enchantments, and cosmetics. The Book of Enoch says, "And there was great impiety among men, and all flesh had corrupted its way." Similarly, Sumerian records tell of gods teaching humans to forge metal, build cities, and harness the forces of nature. While the Sumerians viewed this as advancement, the biblical perspective frames it as moral corruption. The technology and knowledge granted by the Anunnaki watchers enabled humans to dominate nature, and each other, on a scale never before possible. The moral corruption. The union of divine beings and humans was not just physical, it had spiritual consequences. The Nephilim introduced violence, pride, and ambition on a scale that alarmed the divine hierarchy. Humanity, already gifted with knowledge, became destructive. Genesis 6 verse 5 describes the state of the earth. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Sumerians also depict a world filled with war and chaos following the arrival of the Anunnaki. Cities grew powerful, armies expanded, and kings claimed divine authority. Both traditions reflect a profound warning: when mortal beings receive divine knowledge and hybrid blood, the result is both advancement and catastrophe. The Watcher's punishment. The Book of Enoch recounts the consequences for the fallen angels. The archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, appealed to God to intervene. The Watchers were bound in chains and imprisoned in the depths of the earth until the day of judgment. Similarly, the Sumerian pantheon punished certain gods who overstepped boundaries. Some were exiled to the underworld or confined to distant regions, while humans suffered the consequences of their interactions with the divine. The divine judgment in both traditions serves as a recurring theme. Knowledge and power are blessings when aligned with divine law, but disasters when misused or abused. The flood, eradicating the hybrid bloodlines. The proliferation of hybrid beings and the corruption of humanity ultimately led to the flood. In Genesis, Noah is chosen because he is righteous, untainted by the wickedness of the Nephilim. The flood wiped out all but Noah's family, preserving a pure human line. The Sumerian Atrahasis epic tells a similar story. Enlil, enraged by the noise and violence of humans, resolved to destroy them with a great deluge. Enki, however, warned the hero Atrahasis, instructing him to build a boat to save himself, his family, and the animals. In both accounts, the divine aim was to remove the hybrid influence and restore balance to creation. The survivors carried forward the human race, but without the direct intervention of the gods. The legacy of the Nephilim. Despite the flood, legends of giants and mighty men persisted. The Bible mentions Nephilim after that, indicating that hybridization or godly influence may have continued in some form. In Sumerian epics, heroes such as Gilgamesh and other demigods survive in myth, immortalized in stories of incredible strength, wisdom, and longevity. These accounts suggest that humanity's ancestry may carry traces of divine or alien intervention. The myths serve both as historical memory and moral warning, that crossing the line between mortals and gods has profound consequences. The Anunnaki and the future of humanity. The unions between the Anunnaki and humans established a bloodline that influenced kings, priests, and rulers for millennia. The Sumerians explicitly recorded dynasties of kings claiming divine descent, beginning with Enlil, the first king of Eridu, who ruled for thousands of years. These rulers often performed rituals and built temples honoring the Anunnaki, maintaining the connection between human and divine. In the Bible, the concept of giants and mighty men of old echoes this idea. Human rulers who claim divine ancestry appear across cultures: Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian kings, and later European monarchs. Could these traditions be preserving knowledge of an ancient Anunnaki bloodline influencing human civilization for millennia? The spiritual implications. The story of the sons of God and the daughters of men is not merely a tale of physical interbreeding. It represents a collision of divine and human will, a test of obedience and morality. Humanity's exposure to advanced knowledge and divine essence came with a price: the corruption of the heart, the rise of violence, and the eventual cleansing of the earth through the flood. It also raises profound questions: are humans inherently connected to the divine through this ancient genetic intervention? Did the Anunnaki intend for humanity to evolve spiritually as well as physically? And what lessons can modern civilization learn from the consequences of knowledge without wisdom? Part 6 bridges the biblical narrative of the Nephilim with the Sumerian tales of divine human unions. Both describe beings of immense power, offspring of gods and humans, whose existence altered the course of civilization. Both account for widespread corruption, divine judgment, and the ultimate cleansing of the earth. By comparing these accounts, we see a consistent theme: knowledge and power from the divine, when misused or misunderstood, can bring devastation. Humanity's earliest myths and scriptures serve as both historical memory and moral guide, warning that interaction with the divine carries responsibility and that the consequences of rebellion can span generations. In Part 7, we will explore the Great Flood in detail, examining how it wiped out hybrid beings, preserved a righteous lineage, and reshaped human civilization, linking the biblical Noah with Sumerian heroes like Atrahasis. Across ancient cultures, stories of a massive deluge appear repeatedly, from Mesopotamian epics to the Hebrew Bible, and even in Greek and Indian traditions. These accounts describe a cataclysmic flood that wiped out nearly all life, sparing only a chosen few. But when examined closely, these myths share not only similarities in narrative but also a profound connection to the Anunnaki and the biblical Watchers. Part 7 explores how this flood was both a literal and symbolic event, intended to cleanse humanity of corruption while resetting the influence of the gods on earth. The sins of humanity. By the time of the flood, humanity had multiplied exponentially. Knowledge passed down from the Anunnaki, and later through the Nephilim, had transformed human society. Humans built cities, forged weapons, and acquired advanced skills, but they also embraced pride, violence, and rebellion. The Book of Genesis, 6:5, emphasizes the moral decay. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Hebrew text paints a world overwhelmed by violence and corruption. In the Book of Enoch, the influence of the Watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim, is highlighted as a key reason for the divine decision to send the flood. Their hybrid bloodlines carried not only physical power but also an inclination toward chaos and rebellion, which spread rapidly through human civilization. Sumerian sources mirror this narrative. The Atrahasis epic describes humans as noisy and disruptive, drawing the ire of the high gods, particularly Enlil. Though humans had been created to serve and sustain the Anunnaki, their rapid multiplication and growing independence alarmed the gods. Enlil declares, "The human race has multiplied and become loud and unruly. Their work has brought unrest to the heavens." The parallel is striking. Both traditions depict humanity reaching a tipping point where divine intervention becomes necessary to restore order. The Anunnaki's dilemma. Within the Sumerian narrative, Enlil and Enki represent opposing forces regarding humanity. Enlil, alarmed by the humans' growth and hybridization, favors total annihilation. He sees humans and their Nephilim offspring as threats to divine hierarchy. Enki, however, feels compassion for the creations he helped bring into existence. Enki proposes a compromise: he will secretly save a select individual, allowing humanity to survive without provoking Enlil's full wrath. In the Atrahasis epic, that individual is Atrahasis, who is instructed to build a massive ark to survive the deluge. Similarly, in the Bible, Noah is chosen for his righteousness and instructed by God to construct an ark to preserve life. In both cases, a single family or small group is preserved, along with specimens of animals, ensuring continuity for post-flood civilization. This act emphasizes a critical theme: despite divine punishment, mercy and foresight allow humanity to continue, albeit reset and purified. The design of the ark. The instructions given to Atrahasis and Noah are remarkably detailed. In Genesis 6 verses 15 to 16, Noah's ark is described with precise dimensions: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, with multiple decks and compartments for animals. The Sumerian version mirrors these specifications, emphasizing structural design, storage for provisions, and survival logistics. Some researchers argue that these descriptions may reflect actual technological knowledge imparted by the Anunnaki. After all, constructing a seaworthy vessel of this magnitude would require advanced engineering, metallurgy, and organizational skill, all knowledge attributed to the gods in both traditions. This raises intriguing possibilities. If the Anunnaki were indeed the ancient visitors of Mesopotamia, they may have left practical instructions embedded in myth, instructions designed to preserve life during cataclysmic events. The flood itself. Genesis 7 verses 17 to 24 depicts the flood as lasting 40 days and 40 nights, covering the earth and destroying all life except what was aboard the ark. Similarly, in the Atrahasis epic, the deluge is described as a massive storm that devastates the human race, sparing only Atrahasis and his family. The flood serves multiple purposes. Eradicating corruption. By eliminating humans corrupted by the knowledge and influence of the Anunnaki, the gods ensure a fresh start for humanity. Resetting the bloodlines. The hybrid Nephilim are destroyed, ending direct divine interference in human genetics. Reasserting divine authority. The flood reinforces the boundaries between gods and mortals, demonstrating that overstepping these boundaries carries consequences. Interestingly, both traditions highlight survival, not just of humans, but of all living creatures. The selection of species ensures biodiversity is maintained, reflecting the gods' continued stewardship of the planet. The aftermath. After the waters recede, the ark comes to rest on a mountain, Mount Ararat in Genesis, and in Sumerian texts, on Mount Nimush or equivalent sacred mountains. This symbolism is profound. Mountains were seen as bridges between heaven and earth, sacred points of contact with the divine. Noah and Atrahasis emerge to repopulate the world. In Genesis 9 verse 1, God blesses Noah. Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. Similarly, Sumerian texts describe Atrahasis and his family re-establishing agriculture, communities, and civilization. The survivors inherit knowledge, but crucially, the hybrid genes of the Nephilim are largely removed, ensuring a purified human lineage. The flood, therefore, represents both destruction and renewal. Humanity retains the gifts of the gods, intelligence, language, culture, but loses direct access to divine influence. This separation ensures human free will and prevents the recurrence of the chaos that provoked the flood. Why the flood was necessary? From a theological perspective, the flood serves as a judgment for disobedience, sin, and corruption. From a Sumerian perspective, it is a practical solution to a logistical and social problem. Humans multiplied too quickly, hybrid bloodlines disrupted the balance of power, and the noise of civilization disturbed the heavens. In both cases, the flood is a cleansing mechanism. It is a cosmic reset, removing excessive divine influence from humanity while preserving essential life forms. This dual purpose highlights an enduring principle: divine knowledge and power, while transformative, must be wielded responsibly. The flood represents the ultimate intervention when limits are exceeded. Symbolism and legacy. The story of the flood continues to resonate through history. In Mesopotamia, flood myths influence the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim survives a deluge sent by the gods. In Hebrew tradition, the story of Noah becomes a moral and spiritual lesson about obedience, faith, and divine mercy. Across cultures, from India's Manna to Greek myths of Deucalion, the flood motif conveys the theme of purification and rebirth. These recurring narratives suggest a shared memory of a real event, possibly tied to dramatic environmental change or to a series of myths about divine intervention. The overlap with Sumerian Anunnaki accounts raises the possibility that these myths preserve knowledge of real events, catastrophic floods, divine-human interactions, and hybrid bloodlines. The end of direct divine interference. Following the flood, the Anunnaki appear to withdraw from direct involvement with humanity. Sumerian texts suggest that gods no longer interbred with humans on a large scale. Similarly, in Genesis, God places boundaries between humans and divine beings. The flood establishes a fundamental principle: while humans retain intelligence and culture, they are largely responsible for their destiny. This separation sets the stage for later civilizations, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, and Israel, where humans exercise knowledge and power, yet must interpret and mediate the divine from a distance. Humanity's growth is no longer guided directly by the gods but must navigate morality, knowledge, and survival largely independently. The flood represents a pivotal moment in human history, a convergence of myth, morality, and divine intervention. It wiped out the corrupted hybrid bloodlines, reset civilization, and ensured that humanity could grow, free from direct interference by the Anunnaki or fallen angels. From Sumerian epics to the Hebrew Bible, the flood embodies a universal principle: unchecked knowledge, hybrid power, and moral corruption inevitably provoke cosmic consequences. humanity survives, but at the cost of direct contact with the divine, setting the stage for millennia of struggle, discovery, and faith. In Part 8, we will examine how humanity rebuilt after the flood, the resurgence of civilization, and the ways the Anunnaki continued to influence kings, dynasties, and religious practices, shaping the early civilizations of Mesopotamia and beyond. After the cataclysm of the Great Flood, humanity faced a new beginning. The world had been purged of corruption, hybrid bloodlines were largely erased, and the survivors, led by Noah and his descendants, were tasked with repopulating the earth. Yet the legacy of the Anunnaki did not disappear. Though direct intervention had ended, their influence persisted, embedded in the knowledge they had imparted, the technologies they had introduced, and the social structures they had established. Part 8 explores how civilization rebuilt itself under the shadow of the Anunnaki, and how the first human kings and empires reflected a continuing divine imprint. The survivors and the rebirth of humanity. Genesis 9 verses 1-7 describes God's blessing to Noah and his sons, commanding them to be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. This directive mirrors Sumerian instructions to the surviving humans of Atrahasis Ark. The flood was not the end but a reset, allowing humanity to grow in a controlled, measured way. The survivors carried essential knowledge, agriculture, animal husbandry, metallurgy, and basic city building. These skills were not native to humanity but had been taught by the Anunnaki. Enki, who had once championed human advancement, ensured that enough knowledge survived to allow the reconstruction of civilization. Without these instructions, humanity may have reverted to primitive subsistence living. The post-flood period also marked the formalization of social hierarchies. Humans were no longer semi-divine, they were mortal beings, dependent on law, leadership, and order. It was in this context that kingship and early governance emerged, both reflecting and perpetuating the legacy of the gods. The Anunnaki and the origins of kingship. Sumerian texts describe the earliest rulers as being chosen directly by the gods. The Sumerian king list records that kingship descended from heaven, literally a divine grant. The first kings ruled for thousands of years, their authority legitimized by their association with the Anunnaki. The pattern is striking. The gods, who had created humanity and guided its early development, now selected leaders to act as intermediaries, ensuring that civilization remained aligned with divine principles. These rulers often claimed descent from the gods themselves, an idea echoed in the biblical narratives of kings and prophets, who were seen as divinely appointed. For example, the first king of Eridu, Enlil, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. While clearly symbolic, this exaggeration emphasizes the king's semi-divine authority. These rulers were not mere administrators, they were representatives of the Anunnaki, bridging the human and divine worlds. The rebuilding of cities. The post-flood era witnessed the rapid reconstruction of cities across Mesopotamia. Eridu, Ur, Uruk, and Nippur became centers of culture, technology, and worship. Each city bore the mark of the gods in its layout, temples, and governance. Enki's influence was particularly notable. Known as the god of wisdom, water, and civilization, he guided humans in the construction of canals, irrigation systems, and ziggurats. These structures not only facilitated agriculture and trade but also served as temples where humans could maintain a connection with their divine benefactors. In the biblical context, cities such as Babel, Genesis 11, reflect a similar pattern. Human ambition, guided by the lingering influence of divine knowledge, leads to monumental construction projects. While the Tower of Babel story emphasizes human pride and the danger of overstepping divine boundaries, it also mirrors the Sumerian reality of large, organized urban centers shaped by advanced engineering, knowledge likely inherited from the Anunnaki. The continuing influence of the Anunnaki. Even after the flood, the Anunnaki continued to guide humanity, albeit more subtly. Sumerian texts suggest that gods like Enki, Nana, the moon god, and Inanna, goddess of love and war, provided guidance through dreams, visions, and omens. Humans were encouraged to follow divine instructions in agriculture, law, and ritual, ensuring that society remained ordered and productive. These teachings extended to religious practice. Temples became the focal points of civic life, and rituals were designed to honor the gods and maintain their favor. The structure of these early religions directly influenced later biblical traditions. Concepts such as sacred spaces, offerings, and priesthoods can be traced back to Anunnaki guidance. Even myths of divine descent persisted. Early kings and rulers claimed bloodlines connected to the gods, reinforcing their authority and ensuring social stability. In this sense, the Anunnaki had created a self-sustaining system. Humanity could govern itself, but within a framework inspired by divine wisdom. The legacy of technology and knowledge. The Anunnaki imparted practical knowledge that allowed human civilizations to thrive. They introduced metallurgy, enabling humans to work with copper, bronze, and later iron. They taught agriculture, irrigation, and animal domestication, skills essential for city building and population growth. They even shared astronomical knowledge, which guided calendars, rituals, and navigation. This knowledge was both practical and symbolic. It represented the divine spark within humanity, the ability to think, plan, and innovate. At the same time, it carried inherent dangers. Misuse of this knowledge could lead to moral corruption, as had happened before the flood. In biblical terms, the post-flood era represents a second chance. Humanity retains the tools of civilization but must use them responsibly. In Sumerian terms, the gods ensure that civilization continues, but under conditions that prevent another divine human catastrophe. The emergence of empires. As populations grew and cities expanded, early empires began to emerge. Mesopotamia became a tapestry of city-states, each with its own ruler claiming divine legitimacy. Kingship was reinforced by military power, religious authority, and economic control, all tools likely influenced by Anunnaki precedent. The Bible reflects a similar trajectory. After the flood, humanity spreads across the earth, forming nations and dynasties. Tower building and urbanization, particularly in Babylon and later Jerusalem, echo the pattern of human ambition guided by divine knowledge. These empires served as centers for preserving ancient knowledge, maintaining cultural memory, and honoring the gods, ensuring that the Anunnaki's influence, though less direct, remained embedded in human civilization. The moral and spiritual implications. The post-flood rebuilding of civilization highlights a recurring theme: divine knowledge empowers humanity, but moral responsibility is essential. The Anunnaki provided tools for survival, advancement, and governance, but misuse could lead to chaos, as seen before the flood. In both Sumerian and biblical narratives, the flood marks a turning point. Humanity is given a fresh start, a chance to grow without direct interference from gods, but still carrying the knowledge, technology, and cultural frameworks introduced by their divine mentors. This dynamic sets the stage for the rise of religion, law, and kingship, institutions designed to guide human behavior and prevent the mistakes of the pre-flood world. Humanity inherits the legacy of the gods, yet must navigate the challenges of morality, governance, and societal cohesion on its own. The Anunnaki and biblical parallels. By comparing post-flood Sumerian and biblical narratives, several parallels emerge. Preservation of knowledge. Both traditions highlight the transmission of divine knowledge to survivors. Founding of cities. Urbanization reflects continued guidance and organization. Divinely sanctioned kingship. Rulers claim divine authority, echoing Anunnaki appointments. Moral responsibility. Humanity is warned against overstepping boundaries, with consequences for misuse of knowledge. Cultural continuity. Myths, rituals, and religious practices ensure that the divine legacy persists. These parallels suggest a shared memory of events, interpreted through different theological and cultural lenses. Part 8 demonstrates how humanity, after the flood, rebuilt civilization with guidance and knowledge inherited from the Anunnaki. Kingship, urban development, technology, and religion all reflect the enduring influence of these ancient beings. While direct interaction diminished, their legacy shaped the moral, social, and technological foundations of early human empires. The period after the flood establishes a critical pattern. Divine knowledge enables progress, but also imposes responsibility. The Anunnaki influence sets the stage for the development of organized societies, moral systems, and dynastic rule, all recurring themes in both biblical and Sumerian accounts. In Part 9, we will explore the rise of specific civilizations, the influence of Anunnaki knowledge on rulers and religion, and the gradual fading of direct divine intervention in human affairs, leading up to the historical and mythological events that shaped the ancient Near East. After the flood, humanity entered a new era, one marked by rebuilding, expansion, and the consolidation of civilization. The survivors carried with them the knowledge and skills imparted by the Anunnaki, ensuring that cities could rise, agriculture flourish, and commerce expand. Yet, the gods' direct presence on Earth began to wane. Part 9 examines how civilizations evolved under the indirect influence of the Anunnaki, how religion and governance reflected their lingering presence, and how the divine-human relationship shifted in this formative period. The post-flood world. Genesis 10 describes the table of nations, detailing the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These lineages spread across Mesopotamia, the Levant, and beyond. Sumerian records indicate that these regions became home to city-states such as Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Nippur. Humans now governed themselves, yet their actions were guided by the inherited wisdom of the Anunnaki. Agriculture, irrigation, metallurgy, and governance became standard. This knowledge allowed populations to grow, leading to the establishment of social hierarchies, organized labor, and centralized authority. The gods had laid the foundations, but humans were responsible for constructing society on these foundations. The indirect presence of the Anunnaki. While the flood eliminated direct interactions between humans and the gods, the Anunnaki continued to influence humanity indirectly. Sumerian texts describe divine guidance through omens, celestial signs, dreams, and rituals. Kings and priests interpreted these messages, maintaining order and enforcing laws believed to reflect divine will. The indirect influence also extended to culture. Myths, literature, art, and architecture all carried symbolic representations of the gods. Ziggurats, for example, were monumental structures designed to honor the gods while reminding humans of their presence and authority. Temples became centers of political, social, and economic life, reflecting a system where divine favor dictated human prosperity. The rise of dynasties. Kingship, established in the immediate post-flood era, became formalized and hereditary. Sumerian texts record the earliest dynasties, beginning with kings such as Enlil and Aulunga. These rulers were said to receive kingship from heaven, emphasizing divine sanction. The biblical narratives mirror this pattern. Early rulers, such as Nimrod, Genesis 10 verses 8 to 12, are described as mighty men and city builders. Nimrod's construction of Babel reflects both human ambition and lingering divine knowledge, a clear example of how Anunnaki wisdom shaped urbanization, governance, and cultural identity. Dynastic rule ensured stability and continuity, maintaining social order in a world still recovering from the chaos of the flood. By claiming divine authority, kings reinforced obedience and adherence to laws and rituals derived from Anunnaki teachings. The Anunnaki and religious development. Religious systems emerged as humans sought to maintain a connection with the divine while the gods receded from direct interaction. Sumerian religion emphasized rituals, offerings, and priestly authority to mediate between humans and gods. The Hebrews developed a parallel system. While the biblical God had retreated from walking directly among humanity, prophets, priests, and sacred texts became conduits for divine instruction. Worship, moral codes, and sacrificial systems mirrored the Sumerian emphasis on structured, mediated relationships with divine beings. Even in mythology, gods were often represented indirectly, through symbols, celestial events, or moral laws, rather than physical presence. This reflects a universal shift. Humanity was learning to navigate a world shaped by divine wisdom without relying on direct oversight. The role of technology and knowledge. The post-flood era saw remarkable technological advancement. Humans mastered metalworking, irrigation, pottery, and construction, skills attributed to the Anunnaki. Astronomy and mathematics flourished, guiding agricultural cycles, trade, and religious observances. These advances were not merely practical, they were symbolic of divine influence. By controlling nature through knowledge, humans replicated the gods' power. Yet this empowerment also carried risk. Historical narratives, from Babel to Babylon, caution against pride, hubris, and misuse of knowledge, themes consistent with pre-flood warnings. The recurring motif is clear, and knowledge is both gift and test. Humans must wield it responsibly, lest they repeat the mistakes that provoke divine intervention in the first place. The fade of direct intervention. Over generations, the Anunnaki receded further from Earth. Mythology and religious texts suggest that the gods no longer walked among humans, choosing instead to guide indirectly or from the heavens. Sumerian records describe gods residing in celestial or subterranean realms, communicating through dreams, omens, and divine emissaries. The Bible reflects a similar dynamic. God rarely intervenes directly, instead using prophets, angels, or covenants to communicate his will. Humans are left to govern themselves, guided by moral laws and the knowledge of prior generations. This gradual withdrawal established a new paradigm. Humans were now responsible for their civilization while still accountable to the moral and cosmic order established by the gods. The emergence of law and morality. With the fading of divine presence, laws and ethical codes became essential. The Sumerians developed early legal systems, such as those attributed to King Yornamu and later Hammurabi, whose code codified justice, social responsibility, and the protection of the weak. Similarly, biblical texts emphasize moral law, the Ten Commandments, laws given to Moses, and prophetic guidance, as frameworks for human behavior. Both traditions reflect a central truth: without direct divine oversight, civilization requires structured laws and ethical guidance to maintain order. These systems reinforce the Anunnaki legacy indirectly, embedding divine principles into human society through governance and ritual. The spread of civilization. The post-flood period also saw the spread of human populations across the globe. Agriculture and urbanization allowed people to settle in fertile river valleys, the Tigris-Euphrates, Nile, Indus, and Yellow River. Each of these early civilizations developed religious, political, and cultural systems influenced by the idea of divine guidance and the legacy of knowledge imparted by the gods. Trade and cultural exchange facilitated the dissemination of technologies, myths, and governance structures. Stories of divine beings, kingship, and morality traveled across regions, adapting to local contexts while preserving key motifs, giants, divine intervention, and sacred law. The shift from direct to indirect divine influence. Part 9 emphasizes a critical transition in human history. The Anunnaki, once present and active on Earth, gradually receded, leaving humans to govern themselves. This withdrawal established several key dynamics. Indirect guidance. Humans received divine instruction through priests, prophets, omens, and sacred texts rather than direct interaction. Institutionalized religion. Temples, rituals, and priesthoods maintained the connection between humanity and the gods. Structured governance, kingship, law, and bureaucracy replaced direct divine rule, ensuring societal stability. Moral responsibility. Humans were accountable for their actions, as the safeguards of direct divine oversight were no longer present. This shift laid the foundation for organized civilization, allowing humanity to thrive while balancing the influence of divine knowledge with autonomy. The rise of civilizations after the flood demonstrates how humanity reconstructed society while still influenced by the Anunnaki. Kingship, religion, law, and technology all reflect a legacy of divine knowledge filtered through generations. Direct divine intervention receded, but the imprint of the gods remained embedded in human culture, governance, and moral codes. Part 9 highlights a pivotal principle: civilization is both a product of divine influence and human responsibility. The knowledge and skills granted by the gods must be balanced with ethical and social accountability, a lesson that echoes through history. In Part 10, we will explore specific examples of post-flood Anunnaki influence on ancient rulers, kings, and civilizations, examining the ways myths, rituals, and sacred authority shaped human history and recorded the lingering presence of these gods. After the flood, as human societies expanded and developed, the influence of the Anunnaki did not vanish completely. Though the gods no longer walked among humans directly, their imprint remained, encoded in governance, dynastic rule, religious rituals, and the structure of civilization itself. Part 10 examines the ways in which the Anunnaki continued to shape human history indirectly, guiding kings, dynasties, and spiritual traditions across Mesopotamia and beyond. The legacy of divine kingship. The Sumerian king list repeatedly emphasizes that kingship was sent from heaven. The first rulers after the flood claimed authority derived from the gods themselves. Enlil, the first king of Eridu, ruled for thousands of years, establishing laws, infrastructure, and religious practices. Each subsequent king claimed divine sanction, maintaining the idea that rulers were representatives or descendants of the Anunnaki. This concept of divine kingship carried profound implications. It legitimized power and established social hierarchy, ensuring order in post-flood societies. Leaders were seen as intermediaries between humans and gods, responsible for enforcing divine law, conducting sacred rituals, and maintaining societal stability. Biblical narratives reflect similar patterns. Figures like Nimrod, described as a mighty hunter and builder of Babel, exemplify human rulers whose authority was perceived as linked to divine favor. The continuity between Sumerian and biblical tradition suggests a shared memory of kings as extensions of the gods' influence. The role of priests and temple culture. While kings maintained political authority, priesthoods became custodians of religious and technical knowledge. Temples were centers of worship, education, and economic management. Sumerian temples, or ziggurats, were not merely religious sites, they served as storage centers, administrative hubs, and places where celestial knowledge, such as astronomy and mathematics, was preserved. The Anunnaki were central to this temple culture. Gods like Enki and Sin were invoked in rituals, and their guidance was sought for agricultural planning, divination, and civic decisions. The priesthood acted as intermediaries, interpreting omens, dreams, and signs from the gods. In this way, the Anunnaki maintained influence without appearing physically, shaping human civilization through ritual and tradition. The Hebrew tradition echoes this structure. Priests, prophets, and sacred texts mediated between God and the people. Rituals, festivals, and laws preserved the moral and social order, reflecting a continuation of divine influence in human society, albeit indirectly. Anunnaki influence on dynastic rule. The Anunnaki were also closely associated with royal bloodlines. Many Sumerian kings claimed descent from the gods, either directly or symbolically. This belief reinforced their authority and ensured that rulership remained aligned with divine principles. Dynasties were established to perpetuate these sacred lines, maintaining both power and legitimacy over successive generations. For example, the kings of Uruk, including Gilgamesh, were said to be two-thirds divine. Their stories, preserved in epic poetry, highlight a recurring theme: rulers who embody both human and divine traits, capable of achieving greatness and enduring trials, but bound by moral and ethical responsibilities. In the biblical context, traces of this divine lineage appear in figures like King David, whose lineage was considered chosen by God. While the Hebrew tradition emphasizes spiritual over physical divinity, the concept of divinely sanctioned kingship resonates with the Sumerian model, reflecting a shared principle: rulers as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. Technology and civilization as divine gifts. The Anunnaki also left humans with technological knowledge that shaped empires. They taught metallurgy, architecture, irrigation, and celestial observation. Cities flourished due to these gifts, and early civilizations such as Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria became centers of innovation and culture. Temples and palaces incorporated advanced architectural techniques, while astronomical knowledge allowed for accurate calendars, predicting seasonal floods, and organizing agricultural cycles. In many ways, the Anunnaki's contributions created the framework for civilization itself. The Bible preserves echoes of this influence in narratives such as the construction of Babel. Humans, empowered by divine knowledge, attempted to build a city and tower reaching the heavens, a project reflecting both technical prowess and spiritual ambition. The Anunnaki narrative, reframed through monotheistic lenses, becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of misusing divine gifts. Religion as a tool of order. Religion served multiple functions in the post-flood world. It preserved the memory of the Anunnaki, codified moral and ethical behavior, and legitimized political authority. Sacred rituals, sacrifices, and festivals maintained a connection between humans and the divine, ensuring that the gods' influence persisted across generations. Sumerian religion focused on appeasing the gods through offerings and ceremonies. Each city had its patron deity, Eridu for Enki, Ur for Nana, Uruk for Inanna. These deities symbolized cosmic order, fertility, and governance. Priests interpreted the will of the gods, instructing kings and citizens alike in proper conduct. Similarly, biblical religion emphasized covenant, law, and ritual. Prophets acted as messengers of God, guiding kings and people in alignment with divine will. Both traditions reflect the principle that divine influence shapes human society through structured institutions, rather than direct physical presence. The decline of direct divine intervention. As civilizations matured, the Anunnaki became more symbolic than literal. The gods were no longer seen walking among humans, nor were hybrids as common. Instead, their presence was felt through law, ritual, and moral principles encoded in society. This transition mirrors biblical evolution. God's interaction shifts from physical acts to spiritual guidance via prophets and covenants. Humanity is entrusted with responsibility to govern wisely, uphold justice, and maintain moral order. The withdrawal of direct intervention marks a pivotal phase. Humans are now co-creators of civilization, empowered by divine gifts but accountable for their use. Lessons from Anunnaki influence. The post-flood legacy of the Anunnaki offers enduring lessons. Divine knowledge empowers, but requires responsibility. Technology, governance, and wisdom can advance civilization, but misused, they lead to corruption. Rulers as mediators, kings and dynasties must balance power with ethical responsibility, maintaining order and justice. Religion as a guiding framework, structured rituals and moral codes preserve societal cohesion and maintain connection with divine principles. Civilization as a collaborative effort, the Anunnaki provided guidance, but humans must build, govern, and innovate to sustain societies. These principles underscore a recurring theme. Divine influence shapes humanity, but moral and societal accountability lies with humans. Knowledge without ethics leads to disaster, guidance without understanding is ineffective. The Anunnaki and biblical parallels. Across both Sumerian and biblical narratives, several parallels emerge. Kingship is divinely sanctioned, establishing authority and legitimacy. Temples and priesthoods mediate between humans and gods, maintaining order. Technological and cultural advancements reflect divine gifts passed through generations. Moral and ethical codes are essential for stability and prosperity. The stories of Gilgamesh, Nimrod, and early Sumerian rulers serve as historical and mythological reminders of the balance between human ambition and divine guidance. The Bible reframes these motifs within monotheistic theology, emphasizing spiritual obedience over physical or hybrid divinity. Part 10 demonstrates how the Anunnaki continued to shape human civilization indirectly after the flood. Through kingship, dynasties, religious institutions, and the transmission of knowledge, the gods maintained influence without direct intervention. Human societies were guided by divine principles encoded in law, ritual, and tradition, ensuring the stability and advancement of civilization. This period also marks the transition from semi-divine influence to human responsibility. The gods provided knowledge, governance structures, and moral frameworks, but humanity was now charged with stewardship over its own destiny. In Part 11, we will conclude the documentary by examining the enduring legacy of the Anunnaki, the fading of their presence from historical memory, and how myths, religion, and ancient texts preserve traces of their influence, shaping human culture, morality, and civilization to this day. As we reach the conclusion of this documentary, the story of the Anunnaki and their connection to the biblical narratives of Genesis reveals a remarkable tapestry of history, myth, and moral instruction. Across millennia, humans have remembered the Anunnaki, whether as gods who walked among men, as teachers of knowledge, or as figures embedded in stories warning of pride, corruption, and divine accountability. Part 11 explores how the Anunnaki's influence persisted even as direct interaction faded, leaving a legacy that continues to shape human civilization, religion, and imagination. The fade of the gods from history. After the post-flood era, the Anunnaki receded from human society. They no longer walked openly among humans, and their hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, became rare or were entirely absent. This shift marked a transition. Humanity inherited knowledge, governance, and religious structures, but divine authority was no longer visibly present. Sumerian records depict the gods as increasingly distant, residing in heavens or subterranean realms. Humans were left to interpret their will through priesthoods, omens, and celestial signs. The gods' retreat symbolized a broader principle: humanity must take responsibility for its civilization while remaining mindful of moral and cosmic order. Biblical tradition mirrors this transformation. God, having cleansed the earth through the flood, communicates primarily through covenants, prophets, and law. Humanity retains freedom and intellect, but divine interaction is mediated rather than direct. This reflects a universal principle across civilizations: the divine shapes human history, but humans are the stewards of their own destiny. Anunnaki influence in culture and myth. The Anunnaki's imprint on culture and mythology is pervasive. From Sumerian epics to the Hebrew Bible, from Mesopotamian kingship to biblical narratives of giants and mighty men, the echoes of divine-human interaction are evident. Figures like Gilgamesh, Enki, Nimrod, and biblical heroes carry traits of the Anunnaki: exceptional strength, intelligence, and semi-divine authority. Myths encode lessons: knowledge without wisdom can lead to catastrophe, ambition must be balanced by morality, and rulers bear responsibility for justice and order. Even as the gods fade from literal presence, their stories inform moral and social codes. Temples, ziggurats, and sacred rituals embed these lessons into society, shaping behavior and governance. Literature, folklore, and oral traditions perpetuate the memory of divine influence, keeping the Anunnaki alive in human consciousness long after they depart. The moral and spiritual legacy. The Anunnaki narratives carry profound moral and spiritual lessons. The rise and fall of civilizations, the creation of hybrid beings, and the deluge all illustrate recurring principles. Knowledge comes with responsibility. Humanity was gifted with skills, technology, and understanding. Misuse leads to corruption and disaster. Divine accountability: while humans gain autonomy, ethical and moral laws govern the consequences of their actions. Balance between power and ethics: kings and rulers reflect divine authority, but must govern justly to maintain order. Cultural memory as guidance: myths, rituals, and religious traditions preserve lessons from the past, ensuring that humanity does not repeat catastrophic errors. These themes underscore the continuity between Sumerian and biblical accounts. Both highlight the interplay between divine power and human responsibility, reinforcing the idea that the legacy of the gods is as much moral and cultural as it is historical. Anunnaki influence on civilization. Beyond moral and spiritual lessons, the Anunnaki's influence shaped the practical foundations of civilization. Urbanization, agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, law, and governance all bear traces of divine instruction. Sumerian city-states such as Uruk, Ur, and Eridu flourished under systems originally guided by the Anunnaki. Their descendants, including Babylon and Assyria, carried forward traditions of kingship, ritual, and law. Similarly, biblical civilization reflects the imprint of divine guidance, from Noah's post-flood projects to the rise of Israelite governance and religious law. Even today, the legacy of these ancient systems persists. Calendars, religious observances, and ethical codes all echo the principles established by the Anunnaki and preserved in myth, scripture, and human institutions. The mystery and continuing fascination. One reason the Anunnaki continue to captivate modern imagination is the ambiguity surrounding them. Were they extraterrestrial visitors, angels, or mythological constructs? Did they genetically engineer humans, or are the stories symbolic reflections of human experience? The biblical connection deepens this mystery. The idea that the gods of Sumer could be linked to the sons of God and the Nephilim suggests a shared cultural memory of divine-human interaction, preserved across millennia in myth and scripture. Scholars, theologians, and enthusiasts continue to debate these questions, and the fascination endures because the Anunnaki stories touch on fundamental questions about humanity's origins, purpose, and destiny. Lessons for modern humanity. The enduring legacy of the Anunnaki is not merely historical or mythical, it carries lessons for contemporary civilization. The dangers of misused knowledge: advanced technology and knowledge must be tempered with ethical and moral considerations. Responsibility in leadership: just as kings were intermediaries of divine authority, modern leaders bear responsibility for the welfare and ethics of society. Cultural memory as wisdom, myths, scripture, and history encode lessons that remain relevant, reminding humanity of past triumphs and mistakes. The balance between ambition and morality. Human aspiration is powerful, but it must be balanced by ethical guidance to avoid repeating historical catastrophes. The Anunnaki narratives, when studied alongside biblical accounts, encourage reflection on how humanity manages power, knowledge, and responsibility, principles as relevant now as they were thousands of years ago. The Anunnaki and the Genesis connection. The story of the Anunnaki and Genesis reveals a remarkable overlap between myth and scripture. Both traditions describe divine beings interacting with humanity, imparting knowledge, creating hybrid offspring, and establishing civilizations. Both describe consequences for overstepping boundaries, culminating in the flood and subsequent reorganization of human society. Though the Anunnaki ultimately withdrew, their legacy endures in human culture, religion, governance, and morality. Their story is a bridge between ancient myth and biblical narrative, suggesting that early humans preserved memories of extraordinary beings who shaped the course of civilization. In the final analysis, the Anunnaki are not merely characters of legend. They represent a complex interplay between divine power, human ambition, morality, and civilization itself. The question remains, were they literal beings, symbolic representations, or a mixture of both? Perhaps the truth lies in the enduring lessons they left behind, that knowledge, power, and morality are inseparably intertwined, and that humanity's destiny is shaped by how it responds to the gifts and responsibilities of the divine.